All right, so sometimes you're going to run into situations where you have to convert between units. And this is actually a very real world situation that you're going to have to deal with. See, I spent a lot of time working as a physics consultant, and I would do all of my calculations in the metric system, but all my clients would use the imperial system. So I always had to take all of my results and convert them from metric to imperial units. It was a little bit of a pain, but it's something that you got to do. So if you've ever worked with tools, you've probably seen sockets and wrenches that use both imperial and metric units. So this socket right here, it says 5/8. That's an imperial unit. It means it's 5/8 of an inch. Now this one over here is the metric system, and it says 16 millimeters right there. So this one is using the metric system. So throughout the whole world, we have imperial units and we have metric units, and we got to know how to convert between the two. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is using metric and imperial units, and we're going to figure out how to convert between the two. And I'm going to show you a few cool little tricks on how to do that. Now, the majority of the world uses the metric system, and a very small portion of the world uses imperial units. And by a small portion, I basically mean pretty much just America uses the imperial units. Now, imperial units are what I've grown up with, so I'm pretty used to them. But to be honest, it's kind of a hassle having to go back and forth between metric and imperial. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's the reality of the world we live in. So let's talk about the imperial units real quick, and maybe you'll see what I'm talking about if you're not already familiar with how convoluted imperial measurements are. So if I have 12 inches, we know that that equals 1 foot, right? And if I have 1 yard, I know that that equals 3 feet. And 3 feet equals 36 inches. And if I have 1 mile, I know that that equals 1,760 yards, which is equal to 5,280 feet, which is equal to 63,600 inches. So you can look at imperial measurements and see there's really no rhyme or reason whenever you go between different types of units of measurement. And this is just for length. I didn't even go into mass or any other type of measurement. But this is actually why a lot of scientists and really a lot of the world likes the metric system, because the metric system is so much cleaner and easier to work with. So let's look at that. The metric system is essentially a base 10 measuring system, meaning everything is based off of powers of 10. So a really simple way to show you that is to use our King Henry dyed drinking chocolate milk. Maybe you've heard of that before. King Henry dyed base unit drinking chocolate milk. And this is just a little way to memorize the way the metric system works, which is from kilo to hecto to deca to your base unit to deci, centi, and milli. And remember, it goes far beyond higher and lower, but this is just kind of the basic area that we are looking at. And the beauty of the metric system is all you have to do is move a decimal place over, and then you have converted into your other unit of measurement. So if I have 1 kilometer and I want to convert that to a hectometer, it's really just 10 hectometers. I just move the decimal point over 1 spot to the right and it turns to 10. If I wanted to convert that to decameters, that would be 100 decameters. If I want to convert that to just meters, well, that's 1,000 meters. Let's go to decimeters. So you probably guessed it. You just move the decimal 1 spot over. Now you're at 10,000 decimeters, which is equal to, let's move the decimal spot 1 more space over, 100,000 centimeters, and then 1 more time over, 1 million millimeters. So you can see it's really easy to convert between different types of measurements using the metric system. And another benefit is you can also write numbers in scientific notation way easier and convert units between each other using scientific notation way easier. For example, if I said 1 times 10 to the third meters, I know that that is 1,000 meters, but I also know that kilo means 1,000. So if I see times 10 to the third, I know that that means kilo. So this is also 1 kilometer. So you can probably look at that and see why someone like me who grew up with this imperial system over here, which is just kind of difficult to deal with sometimes. And I look at the metric measurements and I just fall in love with it because it's so clean and easy to work with. But like I said, in reality, you sometimes have to convert between imperial and metric measurements. And if you're going to convert between imperial and metric measurements, you have to know the conversion factors. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you need to memorize all of these, but maybe having these, on a piece of paper to your side would be really useful. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different conversions for imperial and metric measurements. The first one is 1 meter, and that is equal to 39.37 inches, which is also equal to 3.281 feet. So that means 1 meter is the same as 39.37 inches, and it's also the same as 3.281 feet. So I'm going to write a few more down. 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters. 1 kilometer is equal to 0.621 miles. 1 mile is equal to 1.6091 kilometers. And then for fun, 1 light year, which is the distance light travels in a year, is 9.461 times 10 to the 15 meters. Now I want to write that number out for you. It's actually 9.461. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is the number of meters light travels in a year. Very large number. And that number right there is a reason why we like to use scientific notation, because no one wants to write all of that out. Anyway, so those are all the different types of conversion factors for length. And in reality, you don't need that many conversion factors. You can go with fewer, but I wanted to give you kind of a little bit of a library of them. Now, what about mass? Let's talk about some conversion factors of mass. So 1 kilogram, which is the SI unit for mass, is equal to 1,000 grams, which is also equal to 1 times 10 to the third grams. So I just wrote 1,000 in scientific notation there. And that's equal to 6.85 times 10 to the negative second slugs. And remember I said in a previous video that slugs are another way to measure mass. Slugs are actually the imperial way to measure mass. Now, 1 slug is equal to 14.59 kilograms. And that's all the mass conversions that I'm going to do. It really doesn't go much further beyond that. Now let's do some time conversions. And the conversions of time are pretty much the same all around the world. Time never really fell into a beautiful base 10 system like length did, because you know that 60 seconds equals 1 minute, and 60 minutes equals 1 hour, and 24 hours equals 1 day. So it's a little bit difficult to convert sometimes between different measurements of time, but we know that 1 minute is equal to 60 seconds. And we know that 1 hour is equal to 3,600 seconds, and 1 day is equal to 84,600 seconds. And time is usually a conversion that people are pretty used to, so I'm not going to go into all the different types. But remember the SI unit for time is the second. Now let's talk about some conversion factors for speed now. Most countries measure speed with kilometers an hour. So 1 kilometer per hour. Now let's convert this to the SI units for speed, which is meters per second. So that's 0.278 meters per second. And a lot of other people measure speed in miles an hour. So that's equal to 0.621 miles per hour. And there's all sorts of other different speed conversion factors, but if you have that right there, you're usually pretty good. So I gave you all these different conversion factors. Now it's time to actually practice converting between imperial and metric measurements. So I want us to convert 15.0 inches to centimeters. Okay, so I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this. One way is very simple and logical. The other way is a little bit more mathematical based, but the second way is actually going to end up being more helpful for complicated problems. So the simple logical way to look at this is to say, well, I know that 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters, right? That was our conversion factor from earlier. Well, if I multiply both sides by 15, that gives me 15 inches. And if you were to plug 2.54 times 15 into your calculator, you're going to get 38.1. And that would be the same as 15 inches. So right there, we converted 15 inches into centimeters. Now let's do it another way. Same problem, just going to show it to you a different way with a little bit of a different mathematical approach. So if I were to say 15.0 inches, that's equal to 15 inches divided by 1. And if I were to multiply that by 1, well, it would still be 15 inches, right? Now let me remind you of a little bit of a mathematical trick. I'm going to erase part of this right here. I'm going to do a little bit of a side note section for you. So if you remember, anything divided by itself is 1. So if I were to say 15 inches divided by 15 inches, that would equal 1. So if I were to say 1 inch divided by 2.54 centimeters, that's actually going to equal 1 as well, because 1 inch and 2.54 centimeters are actually the same thing. And I could flip that fraction over and say 2.54 centimeters divided by 1 inch is also equal to 1, because they're still the same thing. I just flipped the fraction around. So back to the problem over here, I can try to convert 15 inches into centimeters by multiplying it by 1, or I can multiply it by this right here. So I could say 2.54 centimeters divided by 1 inch. Now you might be asking the question, why didn't I choose this fraction up here? Well, the reason I didn't choose that fraction is because I'm wanting to cancel out my inches. You notice here, 15 inches on the top of the fraction, 15 inches on this bottom part of the fraction. That means they cancel out. And so what am I left with? Well, I'm left with 15 divided by 1, because my inches canceled out, multiplied by 2.54 centimeters. Those centimeters didn't cancel out, so they need to stay in there, divided by 1. So that ends up just being 15 times 2.54, which gives me the same answer of 38.1 centimeters. So like I said, that's a little bit more of a complicated way to go about it, but you're going to see in just a minute that that's actually a way more efficient way to handle some of these more complicated conversions. Let's try another one real quick. I want us to convert 2.00 kilometers to feet. So kilometers are the metric, feet is the imperial. If we go back and look at all of our conversions all the way back up here, I don't actually have a straight up conversion between kilometers and feet, but you'll notice I do have a conversion between meters and feet right here. So 1 meter is equal to 3.281 feet. So I'm going to write that down on my problem here. So I'm going to just write a little side note. 1 meter is equal to 3.281 feet. So I have that as a reference. And another thing that I know is that it's really easy to convert kilometers to meters. I just need to move my decimal spot 3 places to the right, and there we go. I have meters now. So instead of saying 2 kilometers, I'm going to say 2,000 meters. And that's equal to saying 2,000 meters divided by 1. And I'm going to multiply this by a conversion factor. So I want meters on the bottom of this other part of my equation. So I'm going to say 3.281 feet divided by 1 meter. So what that does is it cancels out my meters, and it leaves me with 2,000 divided by 1 multiplied by 3.281 feet divided by 1. You plug that into your calculator, you're going to get 6,562 feet. Now that's all well and good and pretty simple so far, right? Let's bump it up a little bit to make it a little bit harder. Let's convert whenever we have multiple different conversion factors we need to do. And to do that, I want us to convert 28.0 meters per second to miles per hour. So you see, we need to convert the meters to miles, and we need to convert the seconds to hours. So I'm going to break this down into 2 different steps. So step 1, what we need to do is we need to convert the meters to miles. Convert meters to miles. Now I could have said to convert the seconds to hours first. That would have been perfectly fine, but for the purpose of this example, I'm just going to convert the meters to miles. So what is my conversion factor for meters and miles? So let's go all the way back up to all these conversion factors I had up here. You notice that I don't actually have a conversion factor exactly for meters and miles, but I do have this conversion factor right here. So I'm going to carry that down to my problem. 1 mile is equal to 1.6091 kilometers. And since it's so easy to convert metric units, I know that that's actually 1,609.1 meters. So there I have my conversion from miles to meters. So I'm going to say 28.0 meters per second is equal to 28.0 meters per second. That's another way to write the same thing. And now I'm going to multiply that by 1, which is like saying 1 mile divided by 1,609.1 meters. You notice that time I put the meters on the bottom because I want the meters to cancel out. So this meter cancels with this meter, and that gives me 28.0 divided by seconds times 1 mile divided by 1,609.1. And if you were to plug that into your calculator, you're going to get 1.74 times 10 to the negative second. And then our units would be miles per second. So that was just step 1. And we've converted the meters to miles. So step 2 is to convert the seconds to hours. And I'm going to build off of my answer that I just got. So I'm going to say my conversion factor is 1 hour equals 3,600 seconds. So 1.74 times 10 to the negative second miles per second is equal to, it's the same thing as saying 1.74 times 10 to the negative second miles, divide all that by seconds. We're going to multiply it by 1 using a conversion factor. And I want the seconds to cancel out this time. So I need the seconds to be on the top of this fraction. So that's 3,600 seconds divided by 1 hour. And that means my seconds have now canceled out. That leaves me with 1.74 times 10 to the negative second miles divided by nothing now because that second is canceled out times 3,600 divided by 1 hour. And you plug those numbers in your calculator, you get 62.6, and our units would be miles per hour. And you can kind of see that when you're looking at all these different conversion factors that we were talking about all the way up here, you can get a good feeling of how different lengths and different masses might relate to one another. You can see that some measurements are really specific, like, maybe a millimeter is very, very specific, but light years are very, very large numbers. And we've talked about in other videos how difficult it can be to get a really accurate measurement. But we can get numbers that are really good estimates. And just being able to look at a result that you get and being able to say, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't make sense, I must have made some sort of error somewhere, is a very powerful tool. And if you look at your answer and you say, okay, this number falls within an expected range, we can call that an order of magnitude estimate. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about in the next video, is order of magnitude.